What helped my surfing the most was looking for the details in the wave. Because I think it's so easy to get lost while you're surfing. A lot of the time you spend either paddling or just sitting there waiting. If you don't have the ability to read the wave properly, technique's not going to help you. That is the hardest part of surfing. Knowing where to go. 99% of your time surfing is not spent surfing. It's paddling around and looking for waves and sitting there staring at the ocean.
Do you struggle with your paddle power? Well, I can go months without surfing and roll to pumping waves and surf 3-hour sessions multiple times a day, day after day after day by using the Basis Paddle Trainer. It was a total game changer for me, and it can be for you too. These things actually work, unlike elastic resistance bands. You can train your paddling anytime, anywhere, so you can catch more waves and have more fun. Just 10 to 20 minutes a couple times a week, and you're gonna be in insane paddle shape. Right? So remember, the key progression is more waves, and the key to more waves is more paddle power. Check it out at surfbasis.com. You're going to be stoked.
All right. Welcome to the Basis Surf Podcast. Very excited because today we got Michael Frampton of the Surf Mastery Podcast. He is one of the OGs in this space. I think you've interviewed over 120 guests at this point. You were one of the original inspirations when I started my podcast as well, because there's just a wealth of knowledge in your podcast and in you yourself as a coach. And I know you have courses as well, but very excited to get into it, try to extract all the little nuggets that you've picked up over talking to all these people. And yeah, so thanks for joining.
Thank you so much, Van. It's an honor.
Cool. Well, why don't we just dive straight in? I mean, there's a million angles that we could take from this, but I think where the place I want to start is, you've interviewed over 120 guests at this point. What have been kind of the best nuggets, best pieces of wisdom, best pieces of advice that you've been able to get over all these interviews at this point?
Yeah, straight into it. Okay. What helped my surfing the most was I immediately think of Tom Carroll. I was lucky enough when I started the podcast, I was actually training Tom Carroll as a personal trainer in the gym, and he was the second guest number 2. And one of the things he was talking about in that original interview was looking for the details in the wave. And that stuck with me back in 2015, as something that I'm constantly trying to improve on, is looking for the details in the wave. And what Tom meant by that, and what I'm still learning, is when you're looking at the wave, most people think that there's a wave coming in, or there's a 1 meter swell at 15 seconds, and that when that wave hits the beach or the point and it breaks along, that's what we surf. Yes, that's the main wave, but there are backwashes, there are secondary and tertiary swells, there's wind chop, there's refractions coming off headlands even from miles away that interact with that main wave. And when we look for and we start to see those smaller details in the waves, then that's what allows. I mean, what fascinated me the most was Tom would have been. This is, 10 years ago. So I was 34, and Tom would have been like 52 probably, and we went surfing, and he's on a smaller surfboard than me, just on these probably waist high waves at a soft beach break. I was struggling to paddle into the waves. I couldn't even catch these waves. And he's doing full roundhouse cutbacks, just going 100 miles an hour. I just couldn't work it out. Like, how are you doing that? Obviously, he's a pro and he's been doing it a long time, but we got to break it down, and it was because he's looking for the details.
Yeah,
he's looking at how that wind chop. That's where I'm going to put the rail of my surfboard, right inside that wind chop or that refracted wave. And I'm going to choose the wave that's meeting the main swell and kind of wedging up a little bit. That's where I'm going to chip in and paddle into the wave in the first place. And I wasn't even aware that that's what was going on in surfing until he pointed that out. So that was definitely a huge nugget, and something that I'm always looking for is those just minor little details. Sometimes when the sun's low on the horizon, it's really easy to see. But when the sun's straight up in the sky and the water's murky, it's so hard to see the multiple swells and the wind chops in the water, etc. Also, just the way the water moves. like especially in some of the beaches in Australia at the time, you get little, what they call it, a rip bowl, where there's a rip running sort of alongside the beach break, and then as the wave's coming in, there's also water drawing underneath the wave too. So your board speed is actually faster than the wave's actually going. It's almost acting like a wave moving towards the beach as well as a standing wave. So looking for the waves that are doing that more in the set. So the first wave of the set at a rip bowl is going to be more powerful because there's actually more water drawing back out from the previous set. There's so many of those little details in surfing that we just don't see as beginners and even as intermediates. Gosh, even, I coach a lot of surfers that just have never even thought. Have been surfing for 20 years and never even thought or realized it. And what part of the reason Tom learned that is because he grew up in a surfing rich culture where his dad surfed and his uncle surfed and his best mates, they all surfed. So they're constantly talking about all this stuff and analyzing each other and surfing different waves. So as me, I didn't start surfing until I was 17 and I was completely self-taught. And when we went to the beach, there was no one else there. There was no one to learn from. All I had was the magazines, which was all, glorified performance surfing. So that little nugget, looking for the details in the wave, that helped a lot. I often use the analogy of, imagine a mountain biker cruising down a hill, down a track that's, say, 1 meter wide. Well, an amateur mountain biker is just trying to get down the track using that meter wide track. But the pro mountain biker is looking, where is the center of my tire going on that track? And what's the fastest way with the least amount of resistance, the track within the track? So that's what I'm constantly trying to look for when I'm surfing. It does another thing, which I think is really important, which segues into the second point, which is it allows you to be more present. So I remember interviewing Matt Griggs, who was Mick Fanning's original trainer with the Rip Curl team, and he was big on meditation, the mindfulness meditation, or his Keeley meditation side of things. And then also interviewing Dr. Michael Gervais, who's the sports psychologist for the Red Bull team, who's also big on the meditation side of things and focusing on one thing like your life depends on it. Is a not quite the word for word, but it's a quote from him. So when you start looking for the details in the wave, it helps you to do that as well. Because I think it's so easy to get lost while you're surfing. A lot of the time you spend either paddling or just sitting there waiting. So you kind of get lost. And then all of a sudden a wave comes and you're expected to just all of a sudden focus in on all this craziness that's going on. So learning to meditate outside of the water helped a lot, because that's just a refocusing. Every time you see your mind sort of drifting off, you refocus, the ability to do that. And then when you're in the ocean, you're focusing on the details in the water. And I think it's, because when you're sitting there waiting for a set to come, another big thing, I remember interviewing Nathan Hedge. I don't think he talked about it specifically, but I remember surfing with Nathan Hedge on the Sydney beaches, and everyone would be sitting there waiting for a set. And then all of a sudden you see Nathan start paddling. He's like, oh, why is he paddling? There's no set coming. And then 5 seconds later, everyone else sees the set coming and starts paddling. But Nathan's already, not only has he seen the set before us, he's paddling to where that first wave of the set is going to break, because he's just seen it before everyone else. So what has he seen? Well, he's been staring at that little sliver of horizon, right? And when you're sitting there at, you're just above water level, it literally is like a tiny little sliver of horizon that you're looking at. Nathan's looking at the tiniest little details. If he sees this little, imagine a 20-cent coin reflecting 3 kilometers away, he's seen that, or he's seen that slight lump right on the horizon. And because of his experience combined with, he's actually focused on looking. He's so hungry. I want that wave. I want the next set. I want to be first. He's so hungry for it and so focused that he sees it coming first. And again, it's looking for the details, not just in the wave that you're surfing, but while you're waiting. Like, can you see that set coming before anyone else? Is it an indicator on the headland in the distance? Is it a shimmer of a chop being lifted by a set coming further out than you imagined? Is it a shadow of a set hitting a slightly shallower part of the top of the oceanography, further out? All these little finer details that not only help us to predict, because it's a game of predicting when and where to catch a wave. That's the best surfer. That's what the best surfers do, right? They predict when and where the wave is going to break before anyone else, and on a finer detail than anyone else. You can't do that if you can't focus. So looking for the details in the wave and in the ocean as those sets come in, combined with increasing one's ability to focus and stay present. Those are the two biggest things that come to mind when you ask that question, because that's the basis, the foundation of surfing, right? Is, can I see the wave coming? Can I get to where it's going to start break before anyone else, ideally, because it's usually crowded. And even if it's not crowded, the earlier and the better your positioning, the more you're going to get out of that wave. So yeah, those were the two things that come to mind.
Yeah, no, those are great. I think it's so interesting that you mentioned that. I was interviewing Isaac Stanton. He's from the North Shore. He's from Maui, big wave surfer over there and competitive surfer. And he talks about how surfing is just advanced basics. And what does that mean though? Like surfing, I was talking to Marcelo Castellano, like Olympic surf coach, and he's like, people get so obsessed with doing a turn. You're just changing direction on a surfboard. But to actually change direction on a surfboard at high speed, on rail, is this incredibly intricate, difficult thing to do. But it's simple at the same time. And there's just so many deeper, it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper the further you go into it, even though on its surface, it seems like this very simple thing. And that's exactly what you're talking about, right? Most people look at a wave, like you were sitting on the beach with Tom Carroll and you're looking at that wave and you're like, oh, that's a wave. And then Tom Carroll sees like a million things going on in that wave, and whoever can interpret and understand all these little subtleties, they're just gonna have this advantage. And I think it's so true. I mean, I think that is actually why I was inspired by your podcast, because there wasn't much in terms of really granular surf knowledge out there. And that's the reason why I ask such detailed questions as well. It's because you have to get into like the nitty gritty of things to really get the juice and get the value, right? And so what you're saying makes so much sense. And it's funny that you also balance it at the same time with that need to focus it, right? Because there is so much, it's this weird, dynamic that you're constantly trying to manage, where it's incredibly complicated and dense and nuanced. But that can be so overwhelming that can inhibit people from doing the next best thing that they should be doing. And they can get overwhelmed. And then that leads to like analysis paralysis. So you need to both have all that knowledge, but then also be able to focus and use that knowledge when necessary at the right moment in time. And so your focus as well, that other piece that you mentioned about knowing how to focus, knowing how to quiet your mind, becomes like so instrumental when you're also combining it with having all this huge, having so much knowledge and trying to find all these details. But they kind of go together, right? It's like meditation. Like, when you meditate, you're actually trying to feel as much sensation and observe as much fine detail as you can. And that process allows you to focus. But that's really interesting that you brought those two up. Most of the time if I was going to ask that question, it'd probably be something technical, but instead this is much more of like this philosophical, deeper, broader approach that really sets you on your journey, huh?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I agree. You got to get the fundamentals right. And the best surfers in the world, even good surfers, the fundamental skill is reading and predicting the ocean and reading the way that water moves and the way that waves interact. Because don't get me wrong, I also think of it, the first interview with Clayton from Ombi, talking about how the surfboard actually works and the basic techniques of a bottom turn and a top turn. The way he simplifies it is great. But if you don't have the ability to stay focused and present, and if you don't have the ability to read the wave properly, technique's not going to help you because you can't implement it and you don't know where to implement it. That's right. Simple. And a lot of times people, the only thing people often, when I do a lot of online surf coaching, is doing a session yesterday, and the surfer was doing everything right. He was just doing it about half a second too early because he wasn't reading the wave properly. He wasn't present. He's just rushing ahead of himself. His body position was good. His technique was good. He was just doing it all. He just had bad timing, essentially, because he didn't know what to look for. He wasn't reading the way the water was moving and knowing where to put his surfboard. So it's a very holistic thing, but I think it is the foundation. Like, there's no point working on your bottom turn technique if you don't have the wherewithal and awareness to know where to put that bottom turn, and to know and to be calm and present enough to know to implement that technique in the moment. Because a lot of the times surfing almost feels like you're dancing in a disco and the strobe light's going. It's like these quick little flashes of what goes on. You pull off a wave and you're not really sure what happened because you were so excited and maybe a little bit scared or feeling a little bit of shame, or how do I look, or that sort of thing. So, and that, for me, that sort of being focused encompasses all of that. It's not as simple as just, meditate for 5 minutes a day. It's, there's a lot that goes behind that. When I work with someone, we're talking about developing your own personal surfing philosophy. Like, are you actually just a puppet of the surf industry? Are you out there on a shortboard trying to rip a turn? Or have you actually sat down and thought about, where do you want to see yourself in 10 years' time? Who actually do you want to surf like? Maybe you'd rather surf like Devin Howard than Kelly Slater? Or maybe you'd just be happy just out there on a longboard, just gliding along. A lot of people haven't even thought that through. And a lot of people approach their relationship with surfing in a very short-term hedonistic way. Whereas I'm here to say, no. Look at Skip Fry. He's in his 80s. He's still surfing. Like, this is a long-term relationship. Everything you do now is compounding over time. It's compound interest. So when people sort of just, because I see surfing as more of an art really than a sport. And it's, how do you want to surf a wave? What kind of board do you want to surf? Let's get out of that mentality of letting the surf industry decide for you. Because we go on Instagram, we're just fed whatever the latest shortboard that everyone wants to buy, and so did this air or whatever. It's fun to watch, don't get me wrong. But developing your own personal surfing philosophy, and then, understanding that surfing is a relationship, and how do you want to interact with the ocean and surfboards, etc. So there's a lot of mindset, psychology, and philosophy that goes in behind that as well, which I think is something that definitely comes through in my podcast over time. And obviously the technique stuff is really important, but I think that's actually secondary, because it's really, really hard to implement the way that you do a turn and change the way you turn if you don't have all that other stuff sorted out first. And it just allows you to be calm and have a lot less anxiety, because anxiety in the surf shame, we've all felt it. That just robs us of the present moment and the flow state, which is when time slows down. And so when time is slowing down and you feel like, oh man, that wave was in slow motion. I knew what my little finger was doing. That's because you didn't care what you looked like. You've got a good relationship with surfing. You were focused on the ocean. You weren't focused on what other people were looking at or what's happening, that section way down there. You were present, you were focused, time slowed down. Now we can look at changing the way you surf, your technique, and we can start looking at footage. And so I see surfing's a very holistic.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's actually making me think. Like, this is interesting. Usually when I have podcasts, we don't get into these kinds of philosophical discussions. But this point that you're making about, the stress that every surfer goes through, regardless of your ability level. I remember I was interviewing Ridge Lenny, and he was talking about how like bummed he would get, like, because he was working on his turns and he's trying to this guy surfs 100-foot waves at Nazare, right? He absolutely rips. He does airs. And he was telling me about how like bummed he would get just when he's trying to tweak his turns, So even surfers at the highest of elite levels still struggle with what you're talking about, And I guess the interesting thing though is I like how you're approaching it from this like broader philosophical approach, because I think that mindset can just make approaching surfing and dealing with your setbacks much gentler, you know? And I would imagine that is especially in such a judgmental, the way surfing can be kind of culture. I think having that, like knowing how to reframe things, knowing how to focus and quiet your mind, knowing how to define your own standards of surfing and not measure it against why am I not doing airs or why am I, comparing yourself to Kelly Slater. I think that is really important. Right. So it makes a lot of sense, but it's interesting. I also, when I think about it, because when you were describing that, it just made me think about my own process, and it's interesting because I've actually personally done a ton of meditation. I used to do there were 5 years I was meditating 2 hours a day. I was really focused in on it. And, I feel like I've done a lot of that work, but for me, this is just personal. Maybe you can give me some coaching here. For me, even though I think it's both sides. I think if because I'm sure other people are having this question. So maybe you can help other people. They might have the same question I do. So because I find this discussion interesting, right? Because I can approach a situation where it's an intense pack lineup, right? And everybody's being watched, everybody's being judged. One of the spots I surf, it's a small town. And, it's somewhere in Central America. I know most of the guys in the lineups, they're all tons of locals. Like everybody on the beach is just sitting there watching you surfing. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So, and then that determines your pecking order. That determines so many things. There's a lot that's the interesting thing about surfing is it's actually intensely social, right? So it's a situation where you can get really in your head. Yeah. Now, the thing is, for me personally, when I'm paddling out there, I will say those affirming things to myself. You know what I'm saying? I'll be like, it's not about other people. You don't need to compare yourself to other people, all these things, and which I think are healthy, but you still have that little thing, that little voice in the back of your head. And for me, the only way that I shut that off is if I put in the work and I put in the volume and I actually do so much work that I have the confidence that I actually will perform well. And then that's when I feel like I have true confidence, because otherwise there's still always this disconnect of where I feel like I should be versus where I actually am, regardless of what kind of mental framework. I think the mental framework helps soften that. But I feel like if I haven't put the work in, then if I haven't gotten the volume in, if I hadn't caught enough waves, then I still, and maybe that's just my ego. Maybe that's just me not having evolved to a certain place, but what would you say to that?
Yeah, it's common and it's understandable. I don't necessarily think that feeling ever disappears.
Yeah.
But when you really sit down and decide what is it that you want to get out of surfing, and you question yourself, maybe let me put it this way. Have you ever been sitting on the beach and seen a good surfer mess up a wave and not surf to their potential?
Oh, of course.
Did you think less of that person?
No. I mean, well, the thing is that it's pattern recognition. That's the way human beings are wired, right? If they consistently blow it, then you're going to be like, oh, but if they blow every once in a while, then you're like, okay,
Yeah, but even if said person consistently blew it for a period of time, would you stop being friends with them?
Yeah, of course you wouldn't.
No, of course not.
Right.
Would they maybe potentially go down the pecking order a little bit in terms of getting set waves? Of course. Surfing, there's a hierarchy of competence in surfing, and there's nothing worse than surfers wasting waves. So understanding the surf culture is part of it as well.
Yeah.
And then that makes you think, oh gosh, maybe I don't want to be fighting for set waves because of the pressure. So maybe I'm gonna buy an 11-foot glider and surf over there where no one else is surfing, and just enjoy the pure joy of just gliding along a wave.
Yeah.
So it's sort of thinking deeper. Where do those pressures come from? Whether they're external pressures from a crowd or internal pressures against how you surfed last week because you were surfing more, or where you think you should be. Again, what do you want to get out of today's surf? And there's nothing you can do. If you live somewhere and it's always crowded, there's nothing you can do about that usually. However, I always find there's always somewhere where a different kind of surfboard would be surfing different kind of waves up the beach or around the corner where there's far less people. That reminds me of another episode with Aaron James, a philosopher. He calls it adventure surfing, where he's just choosing the type of board to suit a different kind of wave that no one else surfs, which is what I was doing for a long time when I was living in California. Everywhere's crowded, except when you buy an 11-foot glider and just you can surf over there where the waves are kind of breaking, but no one else is surfing. You just paddle over there and catch 20 waves in half an hour, and you didn't rip a big turn or anything, but you still connected with surfing, connected with nature, went through the process, and that sort of, I should be surfing like said surfer on the tour that just disappears. And that's what's cool about surfing, is there's so many different ways to surf. That's why I like to think of surfing as far more of an art form than it is a sport. Because obviously when you think of a sport, another individual sport like tennis, there's far more restrictions. If you turn up to play tennis with some weird looking ball and some oversized racket, I mean, people might not want to play with you.
Right.
But in surfing, you can choose where you surf, what waves you surf, what surfboard, what the style of surfing you want to do. It's more like music, you know what I mean? Whereas you can be an amazing jazz musician and know all of the theory and be a technical virtuoso as a jazz musician, but no one ever hires you because they just don't really like your music. Or you can be some teenage punk band that's just playing bar chords, but you're so confident in what you're playing and your style, and people actually like it. And then obviously everything in between. So with surfing, you get to choose your style of surfing. And do you know what I mean? Like, you can think of the teenage punk band. They don't feel the pressure. I'm not a classical jazz musician with perfect technique. They don't care, because they just love getting on stage or sitting at home in their bedroom just practicing bar chords. Whereas that's the beautiful thing about music, I think, is it's accepted that there's different genres and you can be a great musician in a very simple way. Whereas in surfing, it's sort of I think the industry has got a lot to answer for in terms of the pressure it puts on us. You need to be surfing the latest shortboard and doing top to bottom surfing, or you need to be surfing a mid-length like Devin Howard, or a longboard like Joel Tudor. You don't. You could just be like Skip Fry and just stand there looking graceful and in tune with the wave. As long as you're not getting in people's way, it doesn't really matter, I think. Obviously, there's some rules in surfing. You don't want to annoy people or get in their way, and there's ethics you've got to respond to. But apart from that, you get to choose what you want to get out of your relationship with the ocean.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I like this. It's really a question of values. Like, what do you want to take out of your surfing? What kind of surfing do you find aesthetic and beautiful? Like, what do you aspire to, And that's really going to drive your approach to it, which makes a lot of sense. I'm definitely guilty of that. I'm just obsessed with progression, so I don't even question it. But I do think that there is a lot of, and when I say progression, like I think all of that is beautiful, but I'm the kind of person that's always obsessed, like, okay, how can I do a better turn? Whereas your decision might not even be like, I don't even care about turns. I just want to like take the most beautiful line. And you're right. That has just as much kind of value and is just as valid a form of surfing as all the other ones,
Definitely. I've been there. I wanted to, that's what got me in. That's what was the birth of the podcast. I wanted to know what surfing's so amazing, but what does it feel like to do a cutback like that? Oh my goodness. And the progression is obvious, and there's a well-formed line in terms of performance, and the surf coaches that do video analysis everywhere. And it's a great pursuit to do. I think now I'm a bit older, it's not like I've let go of progression. It's just I've defined it in a different way. So trying to maneuver a giant surfboard through small waves is really challenging. It's really hard to do. I challenge anyone to go out there and try and surf a massive surfboard at a novelty surf break through a crowd. I mean, it is a different kind of challenge. It's not easy. People make it look easy. Or maybe the challenge is I'm just going to sit out the back and catch that one big set that comes in every 40 minutes. You know, you can think of the old salty dogs who that's their goal.
Yeah.
So I guess it depends on how you define progression. I think also maintaining a level of surfing ability as you age is a progression in itself. And don't get me wrong, man. If it's 6 foot clean and barreling, I want to be on a shortboard.
Right.
It just so happens it's not often like that.
Yeah, so true. No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, when I interviewed Chris from Pilgrim here in New York, you know, he talked a lot about just getting on a glider and just the sensations and the feelings that he would get from riding an 11-foot skip fry and like the tiniest of tiny waves. And that's exactly how he described it. He's like, it's not easy. It's its own kind of challenge, right? And that's often, those challenges are oftentimes your greatest teachers. And so do you think, you know, as somebody that probably just surfs like a large variety of craft, like what as riding an 11-foot glider, how's that informed your, you know, surfing on smaller boards?
Oh yeah, huge. That was an interview I did probably 5 years ago with Bud Freitas in Santa Cruz. He said, just get on a log. It's the best thing you can do for your shortboarding. I didn't really believe it at the time, but after every interview, I'd always try and implement at least one main takeaway from each interview. So I bought a log and started longboarding, and it forces you have to predict the wave in a very different way when you're surfing a big surfboard. You read the wave differently. You interact with the wave very differently. And then when you jump back on a shortboard, it feels so much easier in a way, because you've kind of almost learned a different way to surf, and you've had to hone in on some different details on the wave, look for different lines. You make, because the surfboard itself is longer and heavier, you end up surprising yourself what sections you can make, what lines you can take to stay balanced. You have to choose your line much earlier because it's not as agile. And all of those lessons can be applied to a shortboard just to refine the way you move and interact with the board, but also obviously the way you read the ocean as well. And I think the same goes with all different surfboards. Obviously with a big 11-foot glider, that's even exaggerated more because it's even longer and heavier than a longboard. But then you can go to the other extreme. You know, I've got surf a 5'2" fish, and all of a sudden you've got almost zero swing weight, and it's very touchy and sensitive, and you have to read the ocean, and your wave selection changes. And then I just interviewed Donald Brink, and he was talking about going as narrow as 12 inches on a surfboard, like going, how narrow can a surfboard be?
Yeah.
And I often think of it as like, let's say you are a musician and you play punk music, but you go off and spend a week learning jazz. When you come back to playing punk, it's going to be so much easier, and you're going to hear, oh, you know what, I could add this note in. Oh, I could write a song. It's still a punk song, but I'm going to write it based on the stuff I learned at jazz school. So whatever you choose to do, whenever you step out of it and come back, you bring those lessons with you. But more so, it just makes you a more rounded surfer too. You think of a musician that has played all different styles. They might have one style they play most often, but every influence they've had and every instrument they learn informs them, makes them more adaptable. If you wanted to work as a musician, you could fit into any band. The more instruments you play, the more styles of music you learn. And because surfing's so dynamic, we want that arsenal. You know what I mean? Like there's a break I surf here, which is, I call it a novelty wave. It's a point break, and it's a very soft wave. It's very much a longboard wave. But every time I go out there's 20-year-olds on performance shortboards just pumping and hopping and just yelling, getting frustrated. And I'm just like, I get you want to learn how to surf a shortboard, but when the waves are waist high or knee high, why? Do you know, it's so much more fun to ride the surfboard that is appropriate for the conditions. And, you can surf anything from knee high to 100 foot. There is no limit in surfing. When you say progression, there's wave size is a progression in itself. How far are you willing to push that wave speed? You can, anyone can nowadays can just book a trip to the tropics and go and surf crazy ground swells in warm water. Surfing is so awesome. And the more we learn about different boards and styles of surfing, I think just makes you more adaptable. Adaptability is a massive one in surfing, I think.
Yeah.
Even at a wave pool, every wave's a little bit different.
Yeah, I remember, I think Steph was talking about, what she's focused on now that, she's not competing, is focused on competing. And she's like, oh, I just want to focus on like how I perform in different variety of waves. That's literally what she's focused on right now. It's just, there's a different set of conditions that I want to get good at. I'm like, you're Stephanie Gilmore. You're probably good in everything, but there's, even for her, she's still like, I want to be better in whatever crappy waves or bigger waves or whatever that might be, so that adaptability is so key. Well, so what are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen people make? What do you see people do? I mean, you've talked about board choice, you've talked about wave selection, you've talked about the mental things. Is there anything else that you think really stands out to you as something that, is something that people struggle with a lot?
But I think most surfers, it's that shame factor that gets in their way. They're ashamed of the way they surf, and it's a catch-22 because it often drives them to get better and drives their progression.
Yep.
But if you think of I use the musician analogy again, the musician isn't going to practice on stage, because if you had to practice on stage as a musician, there'd be a lot of shame for years until you got good enough. But you can practice in your bedroom there's no fear of other people's opinions in your bedroom. So the hardest part of getting better at surfing is the problem with surfing is you have to do it on stage, because there's usually, you don't really want to surf by yourself, especially if you're a beginner. So letting go of that fear of the way you look or what other people think of the way you surf is a huge one, because that's the only thing that's going to allow you to focus on the wave, first of all. So I often say to beginners, stop trying to learn how to surf at First Point Malibu. Like, just go down to a closeout beach break and catch 100 whitewater waves. You get to, there is a difference between a whitewater wave and a whitewater wave. You can still learn how to read better. There's better whitewater waves, You can still learn all the fundamentals of surfing. You can practice it at closeout beach breaks on soft tops. There's less shame, because the only other people there are the people learning to surf, or the person sunbathing on the beach who's not even looking at you anyway. So there are ways to have less of that shame. So I actually think maybe it's getting therapy done, or figuring out, or actually thinking about some of these deeper things about surfing philosophy that will help you in terms of that. And then, so that's the bigger overarching mistake that people make, which essentially is a lack of focus, really. Because if you're feeling shame or anxiety, then it's just robbing your ability to focus on the present moment, and the wave and the way the board feels underneath you, because you're worried about how you look or falling off, etc. It just robs you of that flow state, of that focus. Because when you watch kids learn to surf, they don't care. They don't compare themselves to anyone. They're just messing around. They start playing in the whitewater with nothing, and then they go to a bodyboard, and then they jump on dad's surfboard, and they just pure stoke on the joy of interacting with the ocean, just riding the wave. So they don't have, just because they're kids, they don't have that shame. So if we can, I think as adult learners or adults that want to get better as they age, you can adopt that sort of childhood, joyous mindset and not care about what people think. Easier said than done. That is a big mistake that people make. Board choice is another one. There's a lot of people out there just riding the wrong surfboards for the conditions. So I think matching the surfboard to not only the conditions, but to your level of surfing, as well as like sit down and have a think. Do I really care about riding a performance shortboard? I think you'll find most people don't. They're like, actually, you know what? I could do with a bit more volume, and I just have more fun because I know I'm not going to, So that's the classic one. That's big. And then once you have the ability to focus in on surfing and then be on the right surfboard, then cleaning up your technique is the obvious one there. Obviously, getting some footage and working with a surf coach is a good strategy. But a lot of dry land, like outside of the water training, I think is underutilized nowadays. So, I call it it's almost like a 1% ratio. So if you're surfing for an hour or 90 minutes or 100, let's say you go surfing for 100 minutes, probably one of those minutes is actually surfing. And I think that's quite a generous ratio.
Oh, yeah,
so,
for sure.
Yeah. So think about that. You're standing on a surfboard for 1 minute for every hour and a half that you surf. How are you going to develop the strength, the body awareness, the balance, all of those just fundamental athletic principles? It's going to take you years. So why not stand in front of a mirror and work on your technique and work on some surf-specific strength drills to be able to pop up smoothly and know what does a good functional surf stance look like? What does it feel like? All those simple, and then maybe even jump on a skateboard and lock in some of those surfing moves. The way that a musician would run scales and chords, they're not necessarily playing a song. They're learning the basics and the fundamentals of the song they want to play or learn by learning the chords, holding them so they sound nice, and learning the scales. How do they sound? How do they feel? And look at other, older surfing's very young. It's a young sport or art form. Look at martial arts. Most of your time when you're practicing martial arts is, first of all, a lot of it's philosophy. Sometimes you're just standing there listening to the coach or the sifu speak about the philosophy of the tradition. And then secondly, you're going through forms or katas, slow. The movements that you need to do in a sparring situation, you're doing it slowly or strength training that movement purposely in front of a mirror, whether it's hitting a bag or doing the slow motion movements with someone in front of you. Only then can you go into a sparring situation where, let's say you want to lift your arm up to do a block. If that movement of lifting your arm up to do a block isn't ingrained in your nervous system and is almost thoughtless, there's no way you're going to be able to do that movement in time as someone's throwing a punch at you, because you're so scared. And essentially, Kelly Slater calls surfing a martial art, and I like that analogy because it's such a stressful situation, surfing, because even if you're not aware of it consciously, subconsciously, your brain knows you're in water, you bump your head, and that happens all the time in little waves. People bump their head and they drown. Or they have to be rescued. The sharks, the list of danger. This is part of the reason why surfing is so fun, is because it actually is dangerous, whether you realize it or not. And then the surfing is a game of getting as close to the white water as you can without falling off, as close to the most powerful part of the wave. You're toying with Mother Nature's energy. And when the waves get decent, there's a lot of energy there. And that's what martial arts is, right? You're playing with an external force, trying to dance. This good martial artist will dance with a sparring partner, an external force, and flow with it naturally. But only if they've practiced those movements and learnt them ingrained in their nervous system. Only then can they implement those movements with speed under a stressful situation. So we take for granted how much time and effort and repetitions that these surfers who are good at it put. They've been surfing since they were 4. Yeah. Now, they spent 5 years learning how to read the ocean and playing in the ocean and getting slammed before they even stood up on a surfboard, probably. A lot of them. Just playing in the whitewater and messing around before they even caught an unbroken wave. I'm watching my kids learn to surf, and it's, they've been at the beach almost all summer, every summer for my 13 years, my 13-year-old. Only this summer or last summer was he really starting to kind of get surfing. That's how long it takes. Surfing is a long-term thing.
Oh, yeah.
But I think the cool thing as an adult learner is you can learn. I mean, look at Brad Gerlach, who's got the wave key, for example, where he's kind of literally broken the movements of surfing down into a martial arts kind of thing. That's next level. You don't have to necessarily go that far, although I do think it's great. But the simple keep getting your paddling fitness up, like with your product, is one big thing. And then learning how to do a pop-up in slow motion is another thing. And then learning what a basic surf stance is and how it feels. You get those 3 fundamentals sorted, surfing. My philosophy is that once you stand up on your surfboard with your feet in the right spot, in the right part of the wave, on a good wave, the rest of surfing is easy. So what happens between when the surfboard is under your arm and under your feet, that is the hardest part of surfing. Knowing where to go, reading the ocean, paddling around, predicting when and where the wave is going to break, entering that wave with good timing, popping up with good timing. That is making sure your feet are in the right spot, making sure you're not standing too tall or too low, having a good, simple surf stance. All of that stuff is all the hardest part of surfing, no matter what level you are. Once you're standing up, surfing's actually pretty simple, especially when you look at someone like Oki. Like, he barely moves his body. It's all timing. It's all timing and rhythm. So I think people also underestimate just how hard it is to paddle into a wave, or to paddle to where the wave's breaking and then paddle into the wave and pop up, is the most athletically demanding part of surfing as well. So if you think that it's yoga with dolphins, you're dreaming. You have when you watch these athletes, they make it look easy, yes, but they are very strong paddlers. They have very strong at popping up, and they have a lot of strength and mobility through those movements. Most of them will take it for granted because they've been doing it since they were 4 years old. But that doesn't mean that we can't develop that with dryland training and starting to learn, what do we look for when we go surfing? Like, that sort of, like, knowing how to focus, what to focus on, and training the body like a martial artist would train. That's the basis in paddling, and your paddling fitness and all that stuff. That's the basis of your surfing experience. And it's, ironically, it's what we spend most of the time doing.
Yeah.
Like 99% of your time surfing is not spent surfing. It's paddling around and looking for waves and sitting there staring at the ocean. But
100%.
Yeah, no, this 2015 when I really started to focus on, I was determined on getting better. I don't regret any of it, because I spent years just obsessed with surfing and focused on it and trying to get better and figuring out all this stuff. If I don't surf for a little while, I can still go out into a crowded lineup and even if I've never been there before, because I know what to look for, I can go out and get a set wave and surf. Not as good as any of the locals, obviously, but just because I know what to look for. And it's such a cool place to be with your surfing. It's just to have that ability just to paddle out when you do get a moment and just enjoy. I choose the right surfboard for my fitness level and for the waves. I know what to look for. I know how to read the waves. Like the break I surf, I'd say 1, maybe 2 out of every 20 waves that come through is actually quite surfable. It's a very novelty wake. You've got to have the refractions from the headland and the right periods and the 2 swells meeting up for the wave to actually peel. Most people, I know how to choose those waves because I know what to look for. So yeah, I think being probably one of the biggest mistakes, actually, to give you an overall answer, is people just aren't obsessed with surfing enough.
I kind of agree.
Like, it's almost like, and I went through a stage too where I was like, I felt this obsession and it felt selfish and it felt wrong. I was like, I almost denied it from myself. And then as I got a bit older, I was like, you know what? So what? I love surfing that much. Why not be obsessed with it? And that time I spent years just, honestly, if I wasn't every spare moment, I still had a job, I was still raising a family. But every spare moment I had, I was either surfing or watching surfing or researching what surfboards to wear or watching tutorials on YouTube or reading there's books on how to read water. I was trying different trainers and physical therapists to get the body in tune. Like for years, every single spare moment was surfing. And once I accepted that and dove in, that's when I got better. So surfing is one of the hardest sports or arts.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Because of all those complexities we just touched the surface on. But that's what makes it so interesting and cool.
Yeah.
Is how tricky it is.
It is the deepest puzzle that I've ever tried to crack myself. That's why I'm so obsessed with it. And I feel like that's why everybody's so obsessed with it, because it's so freaking hard. But then if you put the work in and it pays off, it's the best feeling in the world.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah.
So that would be my challenge to anyone listening is just do 1 year. Obsessed with go through one season, summer, spring, winter, autumn, or fall. Go through one season of being obsessed with surfing. Spend your money on surf trips and surfboards and surf education and training equipment and personal trainers, or spend all your money on everything surfing. Follow the Raglan Surf Report and Jonathan Wayne Freeman on Instagram and learn about surf culture through satire. Like, read books on how to read water. Do every course that's out there on surfing. Go work with a local coach. Work with online coaches. Just spend all of your money and your time obsessing and learning about surfing for 1 year, and then see how you feel after a year. Because I think it takes at least 1 year of obsessing with surfing before you even begin to know whether you even want to keep pursuing it. So many people you see start surfing in summer, and they have all this great experience on a soft top and warm water, and then all of a sudden it gets a little bit bigger and the water gets colder as summer ends, and then they give up. That's it. Well, no, come on. You go through the autumn and the winter, and then as spring starts to get warmer and warmer, your second summer of surfing, if you can push through that, my goodness, it's so much deeper and more fun. That's the thing about surfing, is it's so much fun. But I think, like any relationship, you're going to go through hard times. And if you're like any long-term relationship, whether it's with a human or the ocean, you can't expect it to be amazing all of the time. There's going to be challenges. Now, I've never regretted a surf, but there's been plenty of times where I've forced myself to go surfing.
Oh yeah. And that's so funny because you've only been surfing for a year or two. You haven't even gotten to the fun part, I mean, you've gotten a taste, like the tiniest of tastes. And that taste that you get is like the best piece of cake you've had in your entire life, but you have no idea what is awaiting you. What I'm saying? Like getting your first barrel, that piece of cake that you had is just going to feel like something complete, like you can't even explain it. So yeah, those are really wise words. I love it. I really like your philosophical, like big picture approach, which I think is really unique. I haven't really heard people think about it or talk about it in that context. I've heard little slivers of it. There's definitely philosophical surfers, but I've never had a philosophical surf education discussion. So I really appreciate that. But we got to work towards closing up. I got a few last questions for you.
Well, let me just say, firstly, all that stuff I've touched on, all the stuff I've learned through not only doing the podcast and interviewing all these people, but whilst I was on that journey, I was putting all those lessons into place on my own surfing, as well as working as a surf coach. So all that stuff is all in a course on surfmastery.com. So if you go to surfmastery.com, there's a mini course that gives a really concise overview of the stuff that happens in between when the surfboard's under your arm and under your feet, essentially. All the stuff that other coaches aren't going into. And then all the stuff, technique stuff, I do as a one-on-one sessions as well, which you can book there at surfmastery.com as well.
Awesome. And then you're on Instagram. What's your social media handle?
Yes, Instagram, Surf Mastery on Instagram as well. Yep. I'm not overly active on there, but I definitely, once I post a new show, I'll put a little snippet on there and certainly add some of the more curated surfing that I see on Instagram ends up on my story as well.
Okay. Got it. All right, then. So people know where to find you. Last 3 questions. And these are, we'll keep these ones short because these are actually big questions. But just like your short answer, any light bulb moments when it came to technique? Either light bulb moments, either when you interviewed somebody or a realization you had yourself when it came to technique.
I mean, I remember my first proper bottom turn and remembering how much strength it took to do it, and how much force was going through the board and my legs at the time. I was quite surprised, and I'm lucky to enough to have having been filmed. So I saw evidence, and it was the first time I'd really slingshotted back up the wave, 3 times faster than every other bottom turn that I'd done previous. And it took, that was 15 years into my surfing journey before that happened.
Yeah.
And it's that in terms of everything that happens after you've stood up on a surfboard, the bottom turn is the basis of that.
For sure. All right. Any light bulb moments when it came to boards or fins?
Oh yeah, lots. I mean, getting into longboarding was a big one. I would say, yeah, just getting into bigger surfboards. Yep, whether that's a bigger, whether that's a 7-foot mid-length or a 10-foot longboard, just stepping outside of the shortboard mainstream and whatever the mainstream pushes at you. So I would say my first one was getting a log. I got it was a 9.8 Wayne Rich that I got, that really sort of made me fall in love with bigger surfboards, which then led to a bigger glider and some of the mid-lengths as well.
Okay. And what is your intention when you go for a surf? What goes through your brain?
Ooh, my intention when I go for a surf. First thing that comes to mind is to enjoy it, like to have fun. And I think the funnest thing is molding with or dancing with nature. Like listening to the wave and whatever surfboard I've chosen and whatever wave I'm surfing, just trying to be in tune with that and do what's right in that moment, to dance with nature and be in a flow state. That's the intention. There's a quote I like to say to people, which is, don't try and catch the wave. Just accept the invitation to dance. So there's another little tip there in the mindset. And I think that's a good question, because yeah, if you're trying to catch the wave, there's certain, like you're trying to, you're trying to go hunting for it or something and catch it. Well, the wave's just going to do what it does. You actually, if your intention is just to accept, it's inviting you. The wave wants you to be on it. If you have that initial intention, the wave wants you to dance with it. Then it's not only going to help you catch the wave, but help you sort of get into sync with it a bit more often. And that's what all good surfing is, really. It's in sync with the wave.
All right. I guess we'll close it on that. Well, thanks for joining, Michael. This was a pleasure, and people know where to find you. And we'll have to do this again sometime. This was fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Van. Appreciate it.